that. So this presentation is Death to Death by Discussion, New Ideas for an Old Strategy. And our presenters are Heidi Blair, Ling Thompson, and Janeen Galligan from Regis University. And I'll go ahead and hand it off to the group.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us this late in the day, and for some of you later than us. We appreciate the opportunity, LCC, for us to share and open up this topic for discussion. This what to do about traditional discussion forums is something that we've been tackling, and that's where we came to this idea of death to death by discussion. So what you have here is a variety of people. I'm a director, associate provost. Ling is an instructional designer, and Janeen is a faculty member. So we were hoping to provide with a variety of perspectives. And we know our perspectives, even though they're three different, you know, each one of you has what you've been working on in perspective. So we would like this to be conversational. So we're going to share some information, and we're going to ask you, do you have any ideas or practices that you're doing related to that information? Because then we will all just benefit and learn more from that. So please feel free, if you do, when we ask that question, if you raise your hand, it's going to be easy for us to see. And then we'll toss the mic over to you. So again, here are our outcomes from the day. What are some new? We hope that you walk away with at least one new teaching practice for engaging learners in content discourse. So any kind of conversation, discourse around the content areas, and that you will identify at least one new tool. And that's why we're so keen for you to share, because we're keen to hear about the tools you're using, because we can always learn. So if that's not what you thought you logged into, have a good evening. If this is sounding good to you, excellent, stay on and we will keep going. All right, so what is death by discussion? Well, it's the traditional, I'm going to say traditional online format of engaging with students when we didn't have anything but discussion forums to really have students in communication with each other, interacting with you as instructors, and interacting with the content. And that is this old model of you post once and you reply twice. You might post on Wednesday, reply twice by Sunday, and typically that's all text. Also, typically, those discussions are the prompts are written by the faculty member. So this is all faculty centered in that they have control over it. They're deciding what's being talked about. Now, this is the traditional model. There's lots of different ways of doing discussion forums within LMS, but we're just talking about this as a traditional model. And the reason I have these screens going into infinity is if you think about our students, they might do this practice every week for a whole course, and every course in the whole program. And that's why it's death by discussion. Could we be more bored if that's what we did? So we wanted to figure out, and that's what came up with the title, we want to kill off that model. And what are some other strategies and practices, teaching practices and tools that we can bring into the conversation? So we're going to try to progress on from that. And that means that there has to be a paradigm shift. And so what does that paradigm shift look like? Well, I will tell you, first of all, it's difficult. And you probably already know that if you've been trying new practices. We are in the midst of piloting a tool that Janeen's going to talk to you about later that really illustrates this paradigm shift. And it's difficult to change what we've been doing for 20 years and 20, 30 years in online learning and what our students have been doing. So anyway, what do we mean? Well, we're talking about an absence of temporal constraints. Perhaps meaning you don't have to do it on Wednesday and by Sunday. So that's one of the ideas. That's a big shift. Another is that students pose questions. Again, I know that many of you might already be doing some of these, and that's fabulous. And that's some of the practices we're going to ask you to share. That students share resources on topics of interest. So it's not simply the response to a question that a faculty poses or response to a prompt that the faculty poses, that the student is the one who is initiating those. That students collaborate to solve a problem within any of these discussions. In that, we're leveraging multimedia. So again, in the traditional model, post once, reply twice, and might traditionally have been text. So what are other media that we can bring into it that allows our students who maybe writing is not their best way of communicating comprehension and understanding, maybe there's other modes that they can use, media that they can use. So this is the paradigm shift we're talking about, away from the old model, embracing some of these new aspects of what a discussion and conversation about content can be, and some different practices for doing that and some different tools. So let's talk about some of those tools and practices. And as we were preparing for this, we were trying to bring some order to our thoughts. And so we just made up these categories. All right. There's no research behind these categories, and other that they made sense to us and all the tools and practices that we've been working on. And so we identified, well, some of these are synchronous tools, some of them are video based, some of them are leveraging visuals, some of them are generative in that the students during the discussion are producing, authoring a joint product. Some are multimedia in nature, and some are topic centered. Again, we've used these to create a way of sharing these resources and practices with you. You could probably organize these in a multitude of other ways, but for our purposes, this kind of made sense to us. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to right now pass it off to Janeen, and she's going to talk about synchronous discussion practices and tools. All yours, Janeen.
Thank you. I think it's always helpful to know what position, where I'm coming from. So just a little bit about me. I teach communication classes, and the audience that we're referring to right now are post-traditional students who do accelerated classes. So 8-week classes, 7-week classes, 5-week classes, 100% online. So when I'm talking about these examples, it's in the context that these are students who are fully asynchronous in an accelerated form. With that said, the two examples we have on this slide are Zoom and Discord. Now, and so what I've used them for are group work. So we assign instead of a traditional discussion question, we assign students a task to complete as a group. So in this particular example, students are asked to evaluate 3 speeches, work together to talk about their own perceptions, and then decide on a rating for each of those speeches. And that's a collaborative, they need to come up with one rating for their whole group. So here we are again, these are post-traditional students, they're managing work, school, families, community service, you name it. The hardest part of this is finding the time to meet. But because we do have Zoom as a tool that's built into our learning management system, it's pretty easy for them to work together after they find that time. And then because we do have this tool built into our learning management system, one of the things I ask them is for a proof that they met a recording, and that's already built in. That's already, I can set that up so that it automatically records for them. With the office, and now I do want to bring in Discord right now because just this past week, my students were working on that assignment, and I heard them when they were waiting for everybody to come in and they were just kind of chatting. They were talking about Discord and how they feel that it meets the needs of being able to meet in real time, to post comments, to do video or audio, and that it works. So truth be told, I don't have a lot of experience with Discord, but our students are talking about it and are familiar with it and are saying that it is a useful tool for this collaborative teamwork. In terms of office hours, so again, this is a fully asynchronous class online, and I'm sure all of you have tapped into now being able to use the office hour online, where it is connected again to our learning management system. So students can just come in and join that office hour that I have designated. Now, what other instructors do, and what I have done for difficult topics, is for that office hour, I've offered it as a class discussion, completely optional, but students can come in and I'll do a mini lecture, and then they can ask about it and they can talk to other students. Now, of course, this has the drawbacks but also its advantages. The advantages are that these online asynchronous students get a chance to connect with one another. Of course, the negative is that we've got students in all different time zones, all different places. So that could be a challenge. So that is how we have used, in an online asynchronous class, how we have used a synchronous discussion practice and tool. Does anyone, I haven't been checking the chat, but I think maybe Heidi has. Do we have anything that you want to point out?
There are some good comments, and I would keep reading some strategies. Natasha had one, but if anybody has one they want to share, you can just turn your mic off and let us know, or a different tool that you use for this.
Okay, so I'm going to bring up Natasha's because she's got the catchy name of the Wednesday weekly writing workshops. And so it sounds like it's an opportunity for students to drop in and workshop the papers that they're working on.
Great.
Yeah, that's nice. Okay. Should we go on to the next page, and then we'll always circle back. Okay, for our number 2 grouping, we have video discussions. So again, the traditional way of doing the discussions has been through writing. And now we have other opportunities to, not only for the instructors to post a video, but for students as well. And 2 of the tools that I've used in my class, Kaltura, it's also referred to as Media Space. And then those of you that are using Brightspace or D2L or however you want to call it, they have a video. If it's turned on for you, it's not turned on everywhere, but if it's a turned on feature, students can simply go and insert a video directly into the discussion post. So the way I do this is for the discussion that week, I'll ask students, okay, in the readings, what was something that stood out to you? What is most interesting to you? Can you just put together a 1-minute, 2-minute video and tell us what some of your takeaways were? So that's how I've used directly inserting video into the discussions. And again, all of these things have their positives and their negatives. The positive is that students are getting that opportunity for universal design and learning. They're hearing and seeing instead of just reading. And it also gives students a chance to articulate what it is that they're reading and processing. Of course, the negative might be that it might take a little longer. To watch a 1 to 2 minute video may take a little longer than just reading a post. And so then Ling is going to tell us how Flipgrid is used.
Sure. Another tool we use for students to create their videos in discussion is a Flipgrid. Compared to a video note, Flipgrid has more bells and whistles. It's more visually appealing. Students can record videos in their computer or mobile devices. Features such as video filters, frames, and stickers can be attractive to some of our students. So to start a conversation, the instructor creates a new topic. So in this example, you can see here, we have a text-based instructions for students to follow, as well as a video prompt from the instructor. There's a 10-minute limit on the video students can post, but instructors can set a shorter time limit if desired. This instructor loves Flipgrid. She's been using it in almost all of her courses. One of the best ways she likes to use it is to have students frame their own questions and follow the path of discussion throughout the course. According to her, students are able to offer a broader consideration of the content than any question she would otherwise craft herself. She has also found that providing sample Flipgrids for students to review helps support high quality work. So there is a downside of Flipgrid. So it does require instructor commitment to maintenance, such as making copies where appropriate, preserving student data, making sure links work, and clearing out the previous semester's videos before the new semester starts. Okay, back to you, Janeen.
Thank you.
I have a quick question. I'm sorry. On Flipgrid, does it auto caption your videos? Like we use Yuja and it auto captions.
I don't believe so. That's the downside. Typically, we ask students to provide a transcript to go with the video.
Denise, video note automatically does that, as does the Kaltura capture.
On chat, Karen says Flipgrid does caption.
Oh, fabulous. Thank you, Karen. All right, see, we're all learning something new.
I know. That is fantastic. And I think what Ling had brought up and what I'm bringing up are those paradigm shifts. So this was a good example of how students are posting questions and bringing up topics. And then my examples are relating to that multimedia. So and again, this is just an example, and I'm sure a lot of you already do this, but when we're in communication and I'm talking about a certain theory or idea, I ask the students to find just a quick video, usually from a movie or a show or something like that, that they can link to in their discussion that illustrates the example we're talking about. So for example, in organizational communication and leadership, we talk about what's an effective leader look like, or what does an effective leader not look like? So we get a lot of clips from The Office or things like that. And again, what it helps do is it's this engaging another way of thinking, and then seeing how communication looks helps us to tie into our course ideas. All right, we'll go on and I'll, do your students comply with your request to include a transcript of their videos?
Well, can we go back? Because a couple other people we were going to ask people to share.
Yeah.
And so here, a couple people mentioned VoiceThread, and we are going to talk about that later, but I would be quite interested. I think it was Emma and Kaya. Do either of you have an example you'll share?
I've noticed some real success. Our ESOL instructors really like VoiceThread because this is maybe not a great example for this conversation because it's not peer-to-peer, but it is an opportunity for students to practice their oral pronunciation in an asynchronous setting without worry of pressure of peers hearing it. So you can upload your video and then only your instructor can hear it and can provide feedback. In a discussion or an interaction, the cool thing about VoiceThread is that I think as Kaya said, they can post a video or they can just post their audio and then it becomes threaded just like the discussion tool in an LMS, but it's more visual and the instructor has a lot of control over settings. The downside of it as an instructional designer, first of all, it's you pay for it. Our college has a license to it. It can be very challenging if you want to use it as a component for a course that then many instructors will teach, because sometimes copying settings and functionality. It might just be me being a Luddite, but I have really struggled. But those instructors who really have embraced it, it's a very powerful tool.
Yeah. Thank you, Emma.
Heidi, would you like to share what also use it for introductions? Did you want to take that last chat?
Sure. Yeah. And I think, one of the things about we put it, so Kaya just talked about also using it for introductions. And we talk a lot about that as well and encourage our faculty for that, just for the reasons you're saying, Kaya. Did you want to add to your post, or did you capture your idea there? All right. Okay. Thanks, Kaya. All right, Janeen.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, everybody, for these points and ideas. So again, going with the multimedia, one of the things that I'll ask students to do is create a word cloud. And so here's an example of a word cloud. The one particular assignment I'm thinking about is asking students to create a word cloud of effective leadership characteristics. And what I find fantastic about it, and those of you that are experienced with the typical death by discussions, you may notice that a lot of times the feedback seems the same. So if I asked a student, what are effective characteristics of a leader, of a good leader, you'll see that it's the same information over and over. What these word clouds do is you might have some of the same terms and characteristics in there, but all the students choose a different shape. They're choosing different colors. They're choosing a different way to represent their ideas, which I really think it's engaging for students. And again, it helps us as an instructor to see a different way that they're interpreting it. And now Ling can talk about another example for images in analysis.
First, sometimes we ask students to look online for an image, bring that image to the discussion board and discuss, or go out to a field trip and take their own pictures and post them. So the discussion is going to be around the images they found. In this course, I like every week is very structured. For the discussions, they have engage in a theory, then engage in the object. So in this example you see here, they have to go out to find the image of a Buddha and analyze the image based on their reading. Okay, and then in the end, they have to engage with a practice. So it's from theory to practice. So that's the design part I like. I wonder if anyone has any examples to using more visuals in the discussion. So if not, we'll just move on to the next category of practice, is the generative or co-authoring. This type of a discussion allows students to brainstorm ideas, reflect on their learnings, and share resources. The tool we're going to highlight here is the Padlet. Think of Padlet as an online bulletin board. Student can post text, images, videos, or pretty much anything digital. Others can see the postings and as well as comment on them. It can be used both asynchronously and synchronously. The limitation is that the free version of Padlet allows only 3 Padlet boards. However, you can archive the old ones and keep creating new ones. In this example, the instructor used a Padlet for class discussion activity around a case study. After reading the case study, students were instructed to select and participate in 2 of the 4 discussion prompts here. I think overall the activity worked well, but the discussion was a bit on the text-heavy side. It took a lot of scrolling to read everything. So our recommendation is to use Padlet for images or small chunks of text. For example, groups can use Padlet to prepare for debate posting arguments, counter arguments, evidence, or ideas of how to support a position. So I think that's a great use of Padlet.
It also adds, if you don't mind me jumping in, it also adds that component of liking a particular post. So you can even have upvoting if that's something that you would be interested in. So it adds some other options that not all LMSs are integrating yet, as well as a bit more visual interest.
Thanks for this, Heidi. Well, I'll just continue and feel free to.
Can we just go back just to see? I'd be curious if anybody else has tools. So this idea of thinking of discussion as generative, where they're co-creating a collection or source. Anybody else doing in this area? Practices or tools?
Yeah, I see Jamboard. Yeah.
Got Jamboard. Oh, thank you for this. Pizza. Annotation tool. Oh, that's a clever use, Melissa. Great. Thank you so much for sharing.
Yeah. And feel free to add your ideas in chat. We'll make sure to share these later. Yeah, the VoiceThread one, we already discussed that when Emma brought it up earlier. So we use VoiceThread for multimedia discussion. One practice is for instructors to create interactive asynchronous presentations for students to participate. So in this example, you see here, the instructor used the VoiceThread to create weekly presentations. These presentations are more than traditional one-way lectures. They do serve the purpose of unpacking difficult concepts, but more importantly, the instructor asked thoughtful questions throughout the presentation to seek students' input and experiences on the topic. Meanwhile, the instructor also invited students to ask clarifying questions. It makes interaction spontaneous and so much more smooth than a traditional discussion board. One strategy to get the conversation started sometimes is to intentionally embed some mistakes in your presentation. Sometimes, it makes students feel good to point out your mistakes. So it's easy to get conversation started that way. Multimedia discussion can also be applied to peer review activities. We use that in a creative writing course. We use it to facilitate the writing process. You write a draft, get feedback, revise, and keep writing. In VoiceThread, they're free to ask for general feedback or specific questions regarding the plot or the flow. Throughout the activity, the instructor identified many teaching moments to coach students how to provide constructive feedback while treating everyone's work with respect. So that's how we've used the tool VoiceThread to facilitate multimedia discussions. We'd like to hear from you any ideas and any tips and best practice of how you use that in your discussion.
I do want to point out there's a good discussion going on, and normally I wouldn't try to reinforce what's happening in the chat, but I think it brings up a point that we can do many creative practices within the traditional LMS discussion tool. Really what we're trying to break from in different ways. And yes, we're showing a lot of different tools. One of the reasons because it's, we want to just talk about a variety. But what we're really trying to break is that post once, reply twice, text-based. So we're getting great conversation about different ways that you can use the traditional space. And I think that's what Janeen was talking about and Ling with using images and how do you communicate through images? How do you communicate through video? And so I totally agree that you don't have to have third-party tools to kill the death by discussion mode. Sometimes they just make it a bit easier, perhaps not. Anyway.
Okay, thank you. And Yes, these are really good discussions. I like the discussion about renaming the discussion something else. And I've actually done that in the past where instead of calling it a weekly discussion, I've called it weekly activity, where we're doing different things, but it's our touching base because it's a strictly online class. So this practice is it's called Yellow Dig. So it is both a practice and a tool. The tool itself is called Yellow Dig. It is right now we're piloting it and it is embedded into our system. So students simply click on a menu item that says Yellow Dig and it brings them directly to this platform. The platform is organized a little bit more like social media. When my students give feedback, they said it feels that it's more engaging. It has more colors. It has the ability to do a poll, which is in the example of this picture. Students can insert videos, they can insert audios, they can insert links. But what happens is, and this is where we get to that first paradigm shift of not having temporal constraints. And I know some folks of you are already doing this in your learning management discussion boards. You're not having, hey, you need to post by Wednesday, replied by Sunday. But what's beautiful about this is that students earn points. So the system itself, Yellow Dig, assigns points, and those points go for responding to other students, for posting their own posts, for getting a reaction, which is a thumbs up, a smiley face, something like that, getting an accolade from the instructor saying really good post. And those points accrue weekly. There's a certain amount of points that need to be obtained in order to get full credit for that week. But then they have a little buffer of 30% more points that then will carry over into the next week and the next week and the next week. So students are no longer tied to, hey, we can only talk about week one during week one. They can now go back and say, hey, I noticed when you were talking about that project, when you were talking about, this is intercultural communication, when you were talking about collectivist societies, I just saw that happen at my work, or I just saw that happen at school. And so here they're being encouraged to continue having the conversation, even though we might have brought up that topic in week one and now it's week 5. So my two favorite things from an instructor perspective about Yellow Dig is now we've taken that element out. We've taken the element out of time constraints, and we've built in having this conversation about course ideas throughout our whole course. And then the third part is that this is where students are coming up with their own ideas. And typically we come up with our questions as instructors and ask the students to reply. This has students researching, okay, what is it what are we talking about? And what am I interested in about this topic? And then they come in and they post their own perspectives and ideas and initiate the conversation. And being an adult learning based, that is one of the andragogy theories, principles, is connecting to students' experiences and having them take ownership and interest. And that's actually goes to our pedagogy, also giving students choice about what they want to talk about. So that is Yellow Dig. If anybody has questions, otherwise I will pause here for Heidi to talk about what she has read in the discussion board.
Oh, thank you. So we did have a Galligan, I forgot to mention, Charles Igel was originally supposed to present with us, and life got in the way, as life does. But prior to having Yellow Dig available, he was using these concepts of absence of temporal parameters, of topic-based discussion, student-generated, and he was working those through the discussion forum tool within the LMS. So as some of you have said that these are possible within it, it is. One of the reasons that I promoted the pilot of this particular tool is that what I do know is that to scale up change, like what Charles was doing in existing tools, can be difficult. That's breaking habits, that's breaking practices. If you have something that looks different and feels different, one anticipates a different methodology. And so therefore changing that paradigm is facilitated by the tool itself. What we did learn is changing the paradigm, even with a new platform, it's tough because we've been doing this certain ways for so long. But I think sometimes technology can oftentimes facilitate a change in that paradigm. And that's what we were looking for when we went with this tool. What I'd be quite curious about is if others have found different ways of getting to these topic-centered discussions rather than a post that you're answering a particular question sort of frame. So we're getting VoiceThread as one of the tools. Anybody else want to come on the mic and share about how they might be approaching this different model of discussion? All right. Oh, good. Linda, please.
So thank you. Thank you. This is a really interesting presentation so far. When I think about discussions and I really appreciate the suggestions that you're all making about how to get us out of the so often non-productive ways of thinking about discussions, ways that move to a lot of dissatisfaction both for students and faculty. The paradigm really that I use when I think about discussions, both for the classes that I teach and also when I'm working with faculty who are considering using discussion tools in their classes, is I ask them to think about what kinds of activities they're having students do that would benefit from peer-to-peer engagement. Are there places where work that students are producing, where students would benefit from seeing what other people in the class are doing? And I really start from there in terms of thinking about opportunities for using discussions or discussion-like activities. Whether you call them discussions or not is, from my perspective, is really beside the point. What a discussion tool does that's different from what most other tools within an LMS do is it makes student work visible to each other. And so really starting from that place, I found to be a really helpful starting point, and then thinking about what is it that students are doing, why are you asking them to do that, and building out an authentic learning activity starting from that point, as opposed to specifically starting with the tool.
Thank you, Linda. Appreciate that perspective. And always, and as an instructional designer at heart, teacher at heart, always start with what's your outcome? What are you trying to achieve? And then the last thing we might pick is the tool that's going to best facilitate that. So, but I like that paradigm that you're using there. Emma, you have something to share.
Got really inspired by Linda. I couldn't agree more with her. And I think that as an online, developing these online learning experiences for students, some of the faculty I work with are used to face-to-face and the things that they do when they're in an on campus together. And so asking them, like, what do you do in a classroom that you feel like maybe you can't do in an online environment? And out of that discussion, one thing I just want to throw out that we came up with in a medical terminology class was they were really mourning this loss of synchronously being able to hear how students were pronouncing and using medical terminology in sentence and all that sort of thing. So working with the faculty, we came up with an activity that uses the discussion tool in the LMS, where a student is posting a medical scenario that has to use 10 words or 15 words from that week's content. And then later in the week, a student goes on and translates that original post. So students are using the medical terminology in their original post, and then a peer is coming along later in the week and seeing if they can translate those words. The really fun thing, which we're still waiting to see if it gets fully embraced with students, we're in the pilot term right now, is that the Brightspace learning management system allows you to attach an audio recording. So the students write their original post, it's very short, and then they audio record themselves reading it. It's usually less than 20 seconds. And so both their peers and their instructor can actually hear them pronouncing those words. And there are lots of tools in the shell so that they feel confident about their pronunciation. But that was an adaptation of a discussion that had in the past been post and reply twice. So hopefully it's an upgrade and students enjoy it because it's kind of fun. They can talk about, they can like get really creative with their scenario and have characters from their favorite TV shows or whatever they do. They just have to use the right medical words. So that's one example we've used.
Thank you, Emma. Greg, you have an idea?
Well, maybe not an idea.
Okay, something you want to share something.
Well, I'm just curious. I work a lot with STEM courses, so mechanical engineering, computer science, math, and not all the time, but quite often the instructors will say, you know, Greg, we don't really do discussions in mechanical engineering. An equation is an equation and a formula is a formula, and there's not a lot to discuss there, right? So I usually have some answers for that when they say it, but I'm just wondering, some of the tools that you've presented today, do you find some of these maybe better suited for a STEM type course? And do you have any experience that you could share with STEM courses where you've used some of these tools?
Sure. So in our Yellow Dig pilot this spring term, and we have 8-week terms that we use mostly, we had both programming courses and we had an intro to computer science course. And to your point, one of the professors says, you know, we don't do discussions, but he used it for is if there's questions that they wanted to ask. In the past, they've used Slack for that, and they found that that was sort of problematic for a variety of reasons. So he was trying it out for that. We haven't gotten the data back from that yet. So he was trying it out for that in the programming class because they're putting their code into GitHub and other places. They're not sharing the work there, but it was mostly for answering each other's questions. And they also have a lens of looking to application within current context. So sometimes what they're posting about is, you know, have they seen an implementation of particular type of application or some concept that they were talking about in the current context. But yes, and I think the key here is that a platform like this and using some of those other platforms is that you don't have to have discussion questions. This isn't about faculty posting a question. This is about students being able to bring content in. And one of the aspects that we're trying to share is students as co-creators of content along with the faculty member. And as we get away from the faculty posting the question and everybody just responding to that and to this mode that students are generating this, they become more collaborators in content than they are when it's mostly focused. But Greg, we will have that data. We have our last surveys being done in like a week or two. I think that's right, Ling and Janeen. And then we will have that. We're using that data along with the next 2 teaching terms summer and fall to help us decide if we want to take this tool university-wide. But we have had some uses. What we have found that this doesn't work well for is really small classes. Because there's not enough of a number really to build conversation. And because it's not a writing assignment to a particular prompt, it's conversation, that's problematic with really small courses. So that has been a hindrance for this particular tool.
I think we'll just, for the sake of time, we'll continue to the rest of the slides. Another tool we've used to build community is Yammer. We use that just because Regis is a Microsoft campus, so Yammer is part of Microsoft. One program has used it as an optional non-graded conversation space just for students to stay connected. We've used Yammer to use it really as an online blogging site, just for students to post virtual field trips for geology class. So these are some of the applications we've used. Heidi, you need to unmute.
The more modern, I think, contemporary version of that kind of tool is Teams. So how about a thumbs up if anybody's using Teams? That is becoming more and more prevalent across higher ed. And I think there's a much better feel to it. It looks more contemporary. It's also much more robust than Yammer. But I am seeing 3 people have got their thumbs up that they're using Teams for that tool. Okay, time-wise. So here's what we're saying in death to death by discussion. We're not saying death to discussion. We're not saying that discussion boards are bad. What we're saying is we may be boring our students to death if we do the same methodology week in, week out, course after course. And of course, sort of preaching to the choir here because you guys are in here trying to figure out new ways of doing things. So that's really what we're talking about here is let's sort of break that old paradigm of text only, very predictable, faculty focused activity and get more creative with how we can engage our students. And yeah, so you've been sharing a lot during the session, which I really appreciate. And we got the link in there to the Discord. If you want to continue, I can jump into that and I'll monitor that through the conference. But anybody else have an idea that they want to share or a thought or a question in the last 2 minutes? All right. Well, thank you so very much. Really appreciate you being here and appreciate you contributing in all the different ways that you did so.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good
Thank you.
evening.
Good night.
Thank you.
You're welcome.